and welcome to the Cloud Security Alliance's webinar series, CSA Cloud Bytes, where we explore the latest advancements and challenges in cloud computing. Today's webinar, sponsored by Intro Security, is titled, It's Time to Reclaim Control Over Your Non-Human Identities, and we are joined by Itzik Alvas, CEO and co-founder Intro, David Mahdi, CIO Transmit Security, and Eli Elikhman, VP Product and Cloud Security Sprinkler. Just a few quick announcements before we begin. Please be aware that slides from this webinar will not be provided. However, a recording of today's session will be available shortly after its conclusion. Before you leave the webinar, please take a moment to fill out a brief survey located at the bottom of your screen. Your feedback is valuable to us and will help us improve future webinars. Now I will pass it off to our presenters to get us started.
Hello, everybody that joined us. Thanks for the time. I'm Itzik Alvas. I'm the CEO of Intro Security. Intro is a non-human identity security company. I used to be a CISO and started my cybersecurity journey back in the Israel Defense Force on the offensive side of cyber. We have with us David, Mahdi, and Eli Elikhman. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me and for hosting this session. And to our viewers, thank you so much for attending this session. My name is David Mahdi. I'm the CIO of Transmit Security, formerly a Gartner research analyst, where I covered the space and helped define some of the elements of the people, process, and technology, which we'll get into. And my background was kind of a hacker, pirate. So kind of it's like a little bit like you, but like not formal. Then I got into this industry doing malware research, mostly endpoint security, and then I got into identity security after it. I think the topics we're going to cover today, we're talking about how these things are really coming together. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, David, for joining. Eli, would you like to shortly introduce yourself?
Thank you. Happy to be here. My name is Eli Elikhman. I'm a lead product security for Sprinkler. I started out as actually embedded developer working on hardware security modules. So I have a few things to say when we get to non-human identities. Very happy to be here. I also have been a consultant for about 10 years, helping organizations build programs, focusing on people, processes, and technology. And now I'm having fun building a program of my own.
Okay, amazing. So again, thanks for joining us. We're gonna discuss today about non-human identities and secret security. And let me kick it off with the first question. So these days, it seems that everywhere you go, you hear about non-human identities. I think my main question over here is why now? I know, David, you kind of started it, I think like, what, 7 years ago? You started covering that topic. Maybe let's start with you, and then Eli, if you have any comments.
Yeah, absolutely. So really what it came out of when I was at that time, I was at Gartner. And very quickly as a Gartner analyst, you have your coverage areas. And I was kind of a crossover analyst. So I had coverage in identity and access management and coverage in data security. And one of the intersection technologies, the areas that I covered was actually PKI and key management, encryption keys, all of these things. And funny enough, Ellie and I actually worked together at a company called Secure Key, very short period of time, but did a lot of work on security modules, virtual, and then some. But at Gartner, when you're an analyst, what's really interesting is you take in all of these what's called inquiries, and these are you know, organizations, people that are asking questions, and a lot of the time they don't really have a good definition of what the space is and what's going on. They just come to you with their raw problems. And it really is an interesting position to be in as an analyst because, everything's under NDA, everything's, kind of respectful, and analysts are truly kind of unbiased towards certain technology sets. Now we're all human, so we do have our own little bias, but the point is that analysts don't represent an individual provider or vendor. So what happened was I was getting a lot of inbound inquiries on, we're having issues with kind of these machines, or what do you call them, right? Non-humans, or these secrets that we have in our environment. And while we understand the human side, and we've got IAM and IGA and authentication and all of these technologies and programs to handle humans and orphaned accounts and all these things, we don't have any of that for the service accounts, for the machines, for the non-human entities, if you will. Of course, it could span hardware, but in particular, as we saw the launch into cloud and these containerized environments, things just got a little more wacky. So there wasn't really a framework for non-human or machine identities. And so that's what myself, Eric Wallstrom, who's still at Gartner, we kind of got together alongside a number of practitioners and vendors to say we need to define something here so that when customers call in with these problems, we can at least define it, talk about practices, and eventually, as technology providers like Entro, for example, have started to innovate and come to market, these practitioners actually have solutions that they can go to. I'll stop there. There's a lot more, but that's kind of how things got started, at least from my perspective when I was at Gartner.
Okay, interesting. That's how it got started, but maybe Eli, you can take that one. Why do you think it's something that is gaining traction right now?
So I think we always had this challenge, but this challenge is becoming much more visible in recent history. So if I ask myself why, I think the reasons is because the number of integrations that we built as organizations, the number of micro APIs that we built, all of those interconnections are becoming much more complicated and they're growing at exponential speed. And how do you secure all of these new interconnections and all these communications channels that you have both within the organization and with all of your external partners? Well, you need to secure them. You need to authenticate them. So if you want to authenticate them, then means these things have to have an identity to be able to authenticate themselves to everybody else they talk to. And if they have to have an identity, and these are machines, services, various automations, there are non-human identities, and that's, I guess, the term got coined. And because of what's happening with the technology, this is why we're having so many more non-human identities in today's world.
Okay, yeah, I must say I agree with that. I think there are multiple factors of why it's gaining traction. One of them is exactly as Eli mentioned, as we are breaking up the monolith and we have microservices, and now each microservice needs its own set of programmatic credentials, secrets, non-human identities to authenticate to resources they need, like databases or storage accounts. So you have a lot more of those because, again, now every microservice needs one. But then we are adopting more cloud services, and each cloud service needs at least one non-human identity or programmatic access key in order to allow authentication. So that creates a lot more non-human identities. And I think so that's one part. I think the other part is that because those secrets, those non-human identities are usually being created, permissioned, used, managed by teams that are not responsible to secure them. It seems that the attackers, the bad actors kind of realized that in the past 4 years or so and starting to leverage that much more. So like if you're following IBM and Verizon, their reports, they are saying today it's the second most frequent attack vector already. So I think those two contributed a lot to the traction we're seeing in the market. But David, yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, no, this is great. I mean, I think first, if we just step back for a moment, right, and recognize this is all about cybersecurity and identity, right? When we put these things together, nobody invests in security unless they have to, right? And I always put it in this way, right? You don't go to the airport because you have a good time going through airport security. That's not why we go to the airport
Right.
or why we go through security. It enables safe, hopefully safe, secure travel so we can get to our destination, right? That's what it enables. It enables an outcome. And, just having come back from Identity Week Asia, really interesting to just go on the other side of the world and have these conversations about human identity and non-human identity and machine identity, all these things wrapped together. No one really cared about this stuff until there's actual value in the digital world. And there is. And I think it's even beyond what we even understand, right? And so, because Ellie mentioned this, and I agree that we've always had this problem, but no one's cared about it until it's become an issue.
Yeah.
But furthermore, I think Gartner was saying, I think what was it, 83, 84% of all internet traffic are API calls, right?
Yeah.
And these are all non-human. These are all machines, and we're just at the beginning. Especially when I was on stage talking about human anti-fraud models, and I was saying, well, a lot of us are going to have these co-pilot-like assistants, which I can ask my co-pilot to go and find flights for me, and then that can go and traverse a bunch of travel sites, which are all using APIs. That's all API connections. And if we don't have a way, going back to what Ellie said as well, and one identifying all of these entities and then having the right security levels, authentication, and you name it. And that's across, within enterprises, within businesses, and all that. And the last piece, just it's like you mentioned IBM, really, really interesting. And their latest cost of data breach report, one thing that stood out was, well, first of all the major, breaches, the penetration points, we could easily win the argument in saying they're all related to identity. Phishing, that's identity because you're trying to steal credentials from a human, right? All of them are related to identity. But
Yeah.
this is which blew me away. The average time it takes to detect an identity related breach, 300 days. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I know if I went back in time with what I was like when I was a teenager and I just broke things all the time because I wanted to, run a BBS and do all that. If I had 300 days of access into your network with, say, one of these non-human identities, I could do a lot. Or maybe I just resell the access to someone else. So I'll stop there, but that's what we're talking about here. I
Yeah,
mean, it
that's
really
insane.
becomes this big
And
entry
that's
point.
300 days until the organization is aware. It's not until they mitigated it. Yeah, it's insane for sure. And maybe a great segue to our second topic. Ellie, you said it's not a new problem. Um, let me share a story when me and Adam, my co-founder, when we started Entro, when we met some VCs and we, pitched them. One of them told me, that's an ancient problem. And yes, it's an ancient problem. It's an ancient problem. I know non-human identities, it wasn't a market when we started Entro. It is now. But yeah, Ellie, I would love to understand, like, when was the first time when you realize it's a gap in the industry, it's a problem? What was your first encounter with what the industry is calling secret sprawl or non-human identities sprawl? I would love to hear that from a practitioner.
So first time, I would have to go quite far back and talk about something David used to do a lot more, which is PKI. If you think about PKI was a way to distribute non-human secrets to authenticate things to each other. Sometimes they
Right.
were human, but not necessarily all the time, right? Also non-human. So that was something that I encountered for the first time, and PKI didn't really scale very well. There was no easy way to distribute PKI. But also at the time, the amount of identities, non-human identities that we needed to secure was a lot less. Due to all the drivers that we already talked about of why there's so many more non-human identities today, it became a much bigger problem, right? And also, if you think about it, human identities, it's not a new problem. It existed for a long time.
Yeah.
We have solutions in place. And yet, despite the fact that we know this problem very well, the bad guys are still trying to go after human identities to get into the organization. In many cases, phishing is still the easiest way to get inside.
Mhm.
So what it tells us is that the identity is not conceptually, well, it's an easy problem to understand. It's a very hard problem to solve, right?
Yes.
And humans are not good at managing secrets. They're not good at managing passwords. And now we have so many more that are due to non-humans. So that now we are not only not good at saving our own passwords, we're not good at protecting the secrets corresponding to non-human identities, which leads to a lot of leaks, which is probably why we have now this data point that leakage of non-human identities and secrets and everything else what leads to so many compromises. And the other challenge is, again, why does it take us 300 days to detect it? Because it's not that easy to detect, right? If you think about most of the detection tools that organizations had in the enterprise, you have your CDRs, which is around your network and infrastructure level that happens and hosts that happens in your cloud. Your EDR is what happens in your endpoint. These are not application level detection and response tools. And the compromises that are due to non-human identities are usually at the application level.
Right.
So not only is that it's hard problem to manage, it's a hard problem to detect when the compromise does happen.
Well,
So not surprised to hear any of those numbers.
yeah, well, I'll jump in really quick. So first, let's start on the human side, right? Because I think when it comes to the non-human side, there's definitely absolute lessons we can learn. But I would caution on following models that we've seen on the human side, and this is why. And it explains the 300 days. So again, I was a Gartner analyst for about 7 years, and I had front row access to all the major identity and access management providers in the world. And they've done some really great things for the market and getting from where it was to where we are now. And what was that, right? Let's talk about that because there's a big reason why identity breaches are still number one, and we've known about this for decades now. And I blame them for not fixing it because they're in the position to fix it and they haven't fixed it. Here's why. IAM started when organizations had the app revolution. They started building applications, right? And I would hire Itzik and he'd come into the company and I go, oh, he's an engineer. He's going to have access to application A, B, and C. Okay, so he was a joiner. We got that under control. But if he changes jobs, right, he moves, right, joiner, mover, and he goes and let's just say he's going to switch and he wants to go into product management. And maybe he still has access to application A and B, but he doesn't need C anymore. And he now needs other applications. Well, now you had to go into each app to control his rights and entitlements, right? And even worse, when Itzik would leave, right, joiner, mover, leaver, now he could absolutely have an orphan account, and you don't have a single source of truth or trust to go to at least synchronize changes. And that was the birth of LDAP, Active Directory, and really identity and access management systems today. Where am I going with this? When you look at Gartner's definition for identity and access management, it is IAM enables the right people to get the right access to the right resources at the right times for the right reasons. There's nothing in there about adversaries. There's nothing in there about security. You could argue with me that like things like SSO are security, but they're absolutely not. My point is that IAM, as it stands today, was built primarily for productivity. Nobody wanted to get in the way of making sure Itzik could do his job or Eli could do his job. We want to make sure you have access to all the applications you need to do your job and stay out of the way. If we look at the breach of MGM, right? It was a 10-minute phone call where it was knowledge base. And I mean, look, I'll go on the side of MGM for a moment. They just didn't want to get in the way of having employees kill themselves to do a reset to get back in, right? Because again, they wanted them to be productive. So going back to the human IAM systems, and again, you don't have to trust me. I mean, number one, the data point is look at the breaches, look at the 300 days. Oh, and also look at what mergers and acquisitions they're doing. They're trying to fill in security and things like ITDR because that is a missing hole. Now, that's another discussion altogether, but that I think as we come into non-human identities and this side of the market, there's lessons we can learn from there, but I think we immediately have to ensure we have that adversarial mindset and view, and we have the notion of certainly identity and access management, but we also have to ensure that if we see any behavior, odd behavior going on with a particular type of NHI, that we can at least say, hey, something's going on here. We either need to see what's going on. Maybe it's just a simple case of it being misconfigured or it's idle. But if we track behavior and we have that intelligence, that is what I think the IAM human providers are trying to fix right now. And here's a little bit of a like prediction. It's going to be very hard for them. They're going to have to re-architect some of the 20, 30-year-old technology. But I'll stop there. But that's what I think a big culprit is these things were built for productivity. We can't lose that, but it has to be built with and Gartner uses the term identity first security, right? Having that built in or security by design.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you just touched on the biggest gap in the industry of employees moving roles and how to best manage that. Sometimes it's 20 years worth of access in different siloed applications. Another thing that I think, a lot of companies are missing is the programmatic access tokens or the NHIs of the humans. So if you have a developer and he can push code into GitHub, you have a personal access token that allow him to authenticate programmatically to GitHub. But then if he's moving to a product position and maybe you're disabling his user or moving groups and you solve the human identity side, I don't know, but I don't think they are actually, covering the non-human identities as well, because those are outside of that LDAP system or other systems. Going back to the questions, I want to share my story of when I first realized the secret sprawl or non-human identity sprawl is a huge issue. So I was a CISO of an organization, and it was back then where Vaults got introduced. And I was like, okay, it's an amazing idea, right? Until now, we had secrets at config files and so forth, and now we can centralize them in a stored solution, an encrypted stored solution. That makes sense. So of course I purchased one, but now how can I onboard all of my secrets? I have no idea where they are, and I was like, okay, that's a huge issue. And people started to send, secrets using chats and emails, and like, okay, how do I know how many I have and where? I think that was the first time that I realized we have a huge issue with secret sprawl within the organization. And that maybe takes me to, how was it dealt when it all started? I know, at least for me, it was config files usually or environment variables until we introduced vaults. But yeah, Eli, I would love to hear it from you. How did you or your organizations dealt with non-human identities and secrets um, back then?
So I've been with this company for a year, so I can't go too far back in time. And prior to
Okay.
that, I was a consultant. So I'll do my best. But to me, any problem that I'm trying to solve, and this is no exception, is the first step is to understand what I have. So if I don't know what I have, if I don't have my inventory, then I do not know what to protect, right?
Correct.
So the first thing I wanted to do when I start thinking about non-human identities about a year ago in the company that I'm at is that how do I find out the size of my problem? And when I did, there was a lot of interesting and eye-opening experience just to understand not only that, hey, there's a lot of non-human identities, which we already talked about and why, but now where's all of this data located, right?
Right.
Um, and that's really was an eye-opening experience. And this is what, to me, is why it's not just a technology problem. This is people process problem.
Mhm.
And unless the company realizes where all of their secrets are, right? They're not gonna, in my opinion, have a full understanding of the size of a problem contextualized to that particular company.
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I think it's going back to what I said earlier, the teams that are responsible to create those non-human identities, to use them, to permission them, often are not security teams. I think it's relating exactly to what David was mentioning about human identities. The same problem, the same culture problem is now happening on the non-human identity side, or it always happened in the non-human identity side. And now we have more optics around that. So David, maybe how does non-human identity solutions evolved? What companies have done in the past, and why wasn't it enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of industries, again, as when you're an analyst, you're in this interesting position where I always use the analogy of you're like a spectator. You're
Yeah.
sitting in when you're watching the sport. So let's say it's basketball or something. Like I'm actually watching the sport, and I can see the whole field. I can see all the players, the practitioners, I can see the investors, and I can see the actual, technology providers. And for myself, I always try to keep a really strong eye on the threat landscape, right? Because that's the other thing when we think about cybersecurity is that for the technology providers, you have to think about, customer demand, market demand. But again, it's why I believe a lot of the IAM vendors have not kept up with these threats is because they haven't been using the threat landscape
Mm,
as an input into their roadmap, right?
yeah.
You have to be able to look at that. So I totally agree with Ellie that there were these tools in place and but they were very like we use PKI for example, like organizations had the ability to deploy, one private PKI, and then they, were able to go and get public certificates that they could use for websites and voice over IP and all sorts of other use cases, signing, email signing, S/MIME, all that kind of stuff. But the reality is that even if you were to deploy two different Microsoft PKIs, there's no way to actually orchestrate them. And so you have to
Right.
manually know. And so to the point, there's technology. So there was no technology management solution. There's no discovery. And then secondly, to Ellie's point of like the people and the process, like unless you've got a really good process in your organization where you can say, I can go to the lines of business and okay, fine, maybe I don't have the tech, but I at least knew that someone was, and I'm going to use the bad word here, spreadsheet.
Mm,
People using spreadsheets of tracking, at least I might have that. Like, hey, Ellie, you run the UK division. Okay, you got a Microsoft PKI, cool. You're using DigiCert for this. Okay, cool. How many certs do you have? You have all this. Okay, great. I've got that one. Then it's like you're running kind of Asia, same thing. And then maybe I put all that together. Well, here's the thing that was driving people crazy. One of you would leave the organization and that spreadsheet might get taken over by someone new who didn't really know where things were. So I think where we are as an industry now, we just didn't have the discovery capabilities. And I think that's absolutely step one. You need to have the ability to discover what you have. You can't manage what you're not measuring. Discovery at least allows you to find out hopefully what's in your environment and hopefully programmatically, so regardless of someone having an opinion or leaving the organization, you can at least see what's happening. And then that is the first piece of at least assessing where you're at. The next piece then comes in actual like gap assessments and gap analysis, right? Where you then say, okay, I know where these are, and maybe these, I know if we're going to get audited, we might fail based on these ones. So you might want to prioritize based on those. But I think the market overall is one, we have a better idea of what this problem is. Discovery was kind of when I, as an analyst, looked at most capabilities, a lot of providers were focused on that first. And I think what we're entering now is as the maturity of the space increases, is now getting into actual like, really interesting intelligence, automation, recommendations, and all sorts of things. But again, it goes back to some of the early things. If people don't see problems or pains, and unfortunately, if they don't have a failed audit or a breach, they typically won't turn around and spend money on things. But I think things are changing. And I know it's like you guys had done some really interesting research just to kind of going back to vaults and saying like, hey, if I do a discovery and find out 73% of vaults are misconfigured, I mean, that's information I didn't have before. And then you can talk about why that's an actual issue. And now we have evidence to map that potentially to failed audits and or attackers and saying, well, you have all these idle non-humans in your environment. These are just ready for an attacker to get one bit of access, and then they could go right after those things. So anyway, long-winded answer, but that's at least what I see in this evolution as we start to understand this more.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more with both of you. And yeah, regarding Entro research, we started Entro Labs. We have a nice solid customer base now, so we can run some anonymous queries against it, and that was actually one that I find really surprising. The 73% out of all vaults are misconfigured. That's an insane number for me because, okay, I knew or I could assume that non-human identities are over, like they have excessive privileges, they are not being rotated in time, but vaults are not being configured as they should. That's an insane one. I think another one, like a sub statistics around that 73% out of all vaults are misconfigured is that 94% of them have much more permissions than they need. And that means that pretty much everybody in the organization can access those vaults and mess download all of the secrets, which is another huge misconfiguration and gap. Let me share some more numbers with you. So from our customer base, we're seeing that for every human identity in the organization, on average, you will have 92 non-human identities. So even the sheer size is too much to handle. Going back to your comment about Excel spreadsheets, I'm not sure it's gonna work. And then, yeah, 40% of all non-human identities are idle or stale, never was in use. That means that organization can decrease their attack surface by 40% like that by just removing, disabling non-human identities they don't need anymore. 91% of employees who left the organization still have valid tokens. We spoke about that briefly earlier. So developers are leaving the organization, but their non-human identities are still valid, can still be used to access GitHub, AWS. And another one is that 60% of non-human identities are overused. That means they are being used by multiple different resources, which basically means that it's going to be a real difficult job to rotate them or to edit them or to do any sort of maintenance around them. Which one do you find most surprising, Eli?
To be honest, I think I'm not surprised by any of them. Now,
Okay.
does it mean that every single organization is going to have all of these issues that prevalent? Probably not. But they're not surprising. I think, as we said, we had identity and access management problem for many years, and we still have not fully solved it. And that problem is, in my opinion, is a simpler problem than non-human identities, because at least you know who those identities belong to, why they need them, etc. It's easier, in my opinion, to wrap your mind around. Here, to understand what human identities you have, you also need to understand what they're used for. To understand what they're used for, you need to understand how your infrastructure, how your applications, how your networks work. And that is data that you may not have, right?
Right.
So, and this you may be a technical debt that your company have been accumulating for years and years. And now people who work there, they don't know how things work. They just, something works, don't touch it. So, like, if you've seen all those pictures of, they show you the networking equipment and there's 1,000 cables going into
Yeah,
this one router,
spaghetti
and you're like,
cables.
don't touch that, it works, right? Same thing here. You have now this non-human identity sprawl that's building up for years. You
Yeah.
have these complicated systems that work, and nobody quite understands why or how these non-human identities are used. So people are afraid to touch them, which starts building up on all of
Yeah.
these misconfigurations and all these issues. So I think these numbers will only increase unless organizations start to proactively address the problem.
I unfortunately agree. David, any one of those statistics that surprised you?
I actually think so. I disagree with Ellie on something, not everything, but
Cool, awesome.
I
Yeah, that's
actually
always
believe
fun.
that the numbers that Itzik pointed out are actually. I think you're right as in terms of some of them might be higher or lower in certain aspects, but I would actually say it's a fairly accurate representation of the industry as a whole, right? And the reason why I say this, I mean, just again, when I was at Gartner, I did over 6,000 engagements with clients, and it's like at some point, we all think we're individual snowflakes, but then you start to see these patterns. And yeah, there's variations, regions, sizes of organization. I think where it would differ is uh, the journey of their cloud environments, their microservices, their API strategy, how many apps they build. If they're building a lot, you're going to see a different profile of this. But I would venture to say that these numbers are going to be roughly the same for a lot of organizations. And I think it's a good center. Now, again, I think all of us, we're on this journey. We have an idea that these are problems, and I think that we're still just building the business cases. And unfortunately, I mean, it takes it's going to take I hate to say this, but it's going to take a number of breaches to really show the industry like this is stuff you can't mess around with. We have to take seriously. So to answer your question, it's like there wasn't any in particular data point that was surprising to me. Like Ellie, I think they make a lot of sense because they mirror, I mean, different percentage levels, but they mirror what we have with humans. And we know that orphan accounts are problematic with humans. But I just want to jump on the last thing that Ellie said. I mean, as we get into this new world of Gen AI and more agents and more machine to machine, API to API, apps, I mean, we really are in like an app microservice container cloud world where anything we use now is all being done behind the scenes, even on this webinar, right? Between us and our audience, think about how many machines, non-humans, are involved in all of the transactions just to join this session.
Yeah, too many.
There's too many. And so I think these are really it's if a CISO is tuning into this, definitely check out Entro's data points and really start to get ahead of this now, as in terms of thinking about your security posture, right? Your posture of your cloud, your posture of your overall system. And look, the name of the game of a CISO is not to like you're never going to eliminate your threats, but the idea is to mitigate them as much as possible. So it's like I like what you said, is in terms of the perhaps maybe the orphaned accounts or orphaned NHIs, like that's one low-hanging fruit area. If you can identify those and close those up, that's good. If you just like find a way to balance, entitlements and right-size access, maybe thinking about things like just in time, right? That's another way where you can get another, like it seems like small percentage, but those small percentage can really give you big wins from a posture perspective and just threat reduction. But that's where my mind goes when I hear those data points.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And reduction or right sizing permissions of non-human identities, that's another big win and a low-hanging fruit. If your service accounts have admin permission to access a storage account, but they are only reading from that storage account, then please remove the admin and give it read permission. You don't need anything other than that. Um, so let me jump to another topic. Like, how do you see that non-human identity and secrets vertical evolving next couple of years? Will AI have any effect to it? Maybe regulation, maybe because of the trend and the industry that is starting to take care of those. Maybe we will see decretion of some sort of attacks around non-human identities. What do you think about this space going forward? Eli, would you mind?
So
Yeah.
yeah, I can go first. One thing that I'll just do one small note. What would be interesting to see about those numbers is not only what they are today, but how they are evolving and what are they going to be a few months from now, half a year from now, or
Yes.
a year from now. Because my gut feeling is telling me that things are probably going to get worse before they get better, right? So there will be a lot more new non-human identities coming up in the next year. We are still not going to get better at protecting. So then how do I see that goes into how do I see this evolving over the next year or so? I think, yes, there are quick wins we can do, like we talked about just a few minutes ago, but we also need to get better at detection when these non-human identities get misused or compromised.
Right.
So I think there will be a push in the industry to build detection capabilities so that we as organizations can respond to incidents faster, that we organizations can become more resilient, while in parallel, we're doing long-term projects and building capabilities to improve our security posture when it comes to non-human identities.
Yep.
Now, will companies find a way to use AI to help solve this? Absolutely.
Or maybe AI will make it worse. I have no idea.
Probably both,
Yeah.
right? It will help us maybe look for anomalous behaviors, but it will also help bad guys to look for things to exploit, right?
Right.
But I think there will be more push not only in finding what we have and reducing the attack surface, but building detection and response capabilities.
Right. I agree with that. David, any
Yeah,
forecast?
yeah, no, so as in terms of the evolution, I think that while I'd like to be bullish and say, we're going to be ahead and everything else, I think it actually the cold hard reality of the market is it takes time. And, putting myself in my role now and in the past when I've been a CISO and, on the practitioner side and, it's a battle of these priorities all the time. And, you get audited, you're thinking about SOC 2, your ISO stuff, you're thinking about, the lines of business coming to you, trying to be competitive, and everything is a digital business. So the battlefield for competition is digital, right? And so it comes on the CISO's plate to have to try to protect the organization while the organization is trying to put more of themselves out there, right? And that's a
Right.
really big challenge. So I think we're going to see these lines, like Ellie said, I think we're going to see some of these numbers get worse. And I think what will end up having to happen is we're going to have to see a lot more of this get pulled into these compliance standards, starting to see auditors look for these more and more. I mean, again, as a Gartner analyst, what I saw change in the PAM space was when auditors really started looking at those privileged users, the humans, and then really start to wrap around things. So if an auditor would go in, they could just say, let me just look at your privileged user population, which made sense because from a risk perspective, they're like your DBAs, they have access to a lot of sensitive information. I think if we take that model and from an auditor perspective, compliance perspective, framework perspective, and we put that, we map that to non-human identities, right? I think that can really start to move the needle. But as we all know, it takes time. Like they have to be, regulators have to be careful and how much they turn the dial because they turn the dial too far, too aggressive to say you got to deal with all this stuff now. No one's going to be successful, right? So I think we have to be realistic in saying like, what are the actual tactical recommendations they can do? and understand that these issues are going to only continue to build. And the last piece is, yeah, I think with machine learning and AI, I think there'll be a counterbalance, right? I think for strides we will make in using it to say, suck in all the data, be able to give us really interesting results. So I don't need to run 1,000 reports myself. To Ellie's point, like perhaps even giving an idea of possible anomalies or indicators of compromise, that would all be really cool. And I think that is definitely something that I'd look to folks like you at Intro to innovate on behalf of the market. But the counterbalance of AI is that twofold, right? Again, I put myself in the shoes of like a CIO, a CEO, a CISO. If they're getting pressure from the business, I know some of my friends right now that are CIOs, they're getting pressure to deploy Gen AI internally, LLMs internally. What's the number one concern? Privacy, right? Like if
Yeah.
they're taking any of this information and pushing it out to a cloud service, they're worried where that's going. So that's one, but their hand is being forced. And so I highly suspect, based on a number of conversations I've had around the world, that we are going to see some issues with AI as in terms of data privacy and control, and it will map back to these non-humans. But the second piece, though, so that's companies deploying. There's another piece to the counterbalance of AI, the negative side of AI, I would say, um, is attackers. Attackers don't have compliance. They don't have to worry about red tape, and they are adopting this technology much faster than us. So what Transmit Security research found was that, less than 6 months after the public release of ChatGPT, there was Worm GPT, Fraud GPT, and Evil GPT. And when you look at these services, what they do is similar to ChatGPT. You can go in and get code samples and all this other stuff, and that's one thing. But the other thing is when you can actually say, give me reconnaissance information of this company. And perhaps in the very near future, we'll see, hey, these are all these service accounts that are all wide open. And oh, by the way, if you need like the human IT team, this is where they are, right? And they can go ahead and use all these tools, and they're not thinking in lines of business. They're not thinking as in terms of like audits that they have to pass because they don't, and they can try and fail and then change and then try again. So I think what we're starting to see with AI, and not so much in like I'm talking about things like deep fakes and all those things. That's another topic. But I'm talking about their ability to mine information, vulnerability information, reconnaissance information, and tailor targeted attacks. There was a colleague of mine at a telecom company who will go unnamed. They said the biggest change they're seeing is the attacker's ability to automate and scale their attacks in the last 6 months, 7 months has been unprecedented. So what they could do before would be like this, they now can scale it. And unlike the good actors, us, they don't have to worry about failing. They can just go over and try it again. So I think we have to be careful with those things, but those just become further accelerators of what we're doing here, as in terms of non-humans and wrapping our heads around this.
Yeah, that's scary for sure. I will say that I think that regulation is going the right way, like PCI version 4, which will be required since I think March of 25, have some controls around non-human identities. I think those are control sections 7, 8, and 10. So
Mhm.
regulation is going to the right direction. Okay, so thank you so much for the time. Let's wrap it up by you both are in charge for the security of a billion, multiple billion companies. So how are you going about securing non-human identities today, and what can you share or recommend a cybersecurity professional that is hearing you right now on, securing their non-human identities and secrets? Ellie, would you like to?
Sure.
Yeah,
So I think, as I said previously, the first step is measure what you have, understand what non-human identities you have. what they're being used for, and where are they actually stored in your organization. Because I think you're gonna realize that how these secrets are shared within the organization between humans is also a big challenge. So once you get your initial perspective, you're gonna have a better idea of what technological problems you're having, what people problems you're having, and what process problems you have. Once you get all of those angles from building the inventory of what you have, you're going to be able to figure out the strategy on how you're going to deal with this. And your strategy is going to be a combination of people, process, technology. It's going to be a combination of quick wins. How can you quickly reduce your attack surface, which is non-human identities that nobody's using? You're going to build a long-term strategy. And I also would advise you to build a strategy on how you're going to detect and respond to when you do get compromised because of non-human identities. And the challenge you're going to see is that you're going to have to take a look at all of your detection capabilities and see, do your detection capabilities actually give you that visibility? And if they don't, which in many cases they probably don't, how do you address that gap? So
Yeah,
that would be my advice.
that's a good one. David?
Yeah, I'm going to carry that advice forward. So think about doing exactly what Ellie mentioned, as in terms of your discovery, uh, having an idea of what's out there. But then the next steps would be doing some kind of risk mapping, right? So
Right.
again, if you know what it's used for, well, what's the sensitivity of perhaps the data that those NHIs have access to, right? So if you can map those to risk, and if you have a risk framework, mapping it to that, right? The second piece of that is also mapping it to people, right? So if there are those humans in the environment, and what I mean by that is you can say, hey, okay, we found all of these NHIs in this one line of business, and maybe it's, our mobile, it's a mobile app line of business, right? They deal with all the mobile app stuff, right? Okay. Who in there is who are the developers in charge? How are they doing that, right? And you can find out who those people are. And the reason why I'm saying all that is there was a piece of Gartner research that I launched just before I left, actually, and it was called it was actually an infographic just giving high level recommendations on building a cryptography center of excellence, right? And that cryptography center of excellence is about people, process, and technology. But we say, hey, you're going to have all sorts of people that touch certificates and touch, all these secrets and all these service accounts across the organization. So you're not going to build one centralized team, but you can build a centralized practice hub, and you can build a virtual team where you can start to assign champions within those units to say, hey, it's Ellie that is a part of that mobile app business. I'm going to make sure that he's involved and he understands the policy and he understands the problems. Now, my last bit of advice is, how do you actually do that then? Like, how would I get Ellie and those people to care? Furthermore, I probably have to go to Ellie's management, or maybe even higher than that, to get their buy-in before I can start like creating a virtual team. How do you do that? Well, one recommendation that I've done this many times is, and it goes on a little bit of the detection and response that Ellie talked about, and really to make it real, do tabletop exercises, right? And involve these people in it. So like, hey, I'm a developer, I'm not a security person. That's fine, but you're writing software and using these identities that could be a penetration point for an attacker. So there's organizations out there that do gamified tabletop exercises, virtual ones, physical ones. Bring them in and give them scenarios that wrap around these non-human identities and issues that can happen, and show them what happens when a breach happens. And especially if you have an executive leader that's involved, you can say, hey, like they actually went and did this, and then they eventually got into this account. And then they used that to get in, and they got all this personal data about you as an executive, for example. And they did that through a non-human account, right? Really show the extent of it. But furthermore, it starts to build the thought process within the organization and that virtual team of the criticality of these entities. And once they're created, they're not just created and left. People create them and then they have more of a notion of the responsibility of how critical these things are. So yeah, I mean, just to summarize, I would say risk mapping, people mapping, um, uh, consider building virtual teams, and then consider using things like tabletop exercises to really solidify the criticality of it, but also to make the team gel much, much more.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I'll just add on what Ellie was saying and you, David. Budget for it, budget and time, right? Create a project, try to understand what is the nature of the problem within your organization. And then I think if you need buy-in, just one comment on what you said, David. If you need buy-in from the organization, just show them, hey, it's the second most frequent attack vector out there, and we just want to get better, right? So now we're at point A, we're trying to get 10%, 20% better year over year. Um, small bites. So, Eli, David, again, thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with everybody on this webinar. Couldn't thank you enough. And yeah, thanks for sharing and allocating your time and knowledge again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Itzik, David, and Eli for presenting, and thank you to our participants for joining us today. If you have further questions or would like to continue the discussion, please contact us at events@cloudsecurityalliance.org. We value your feedback and look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and have a wonderful day.